Well, I know it's been a while since I posted any new videos on the Aerostar Pilot YouTube channel, and that's going to change here pretty soon. As most of you know, I'm in between airplanes right now and probably won't have another one to use until towards the end of the year, but it is coming. The continuing saga of 1-4 Victor Mike, the one we resurrected, is pretty close to flying, and that one will be upcoming pretty soon. But today, I want to introduce you to Mark Henshall, who's one of the handful of Aerostar Owner Association and insurance approved Aerostar instructors. It's also a A&P and a regional airline pilot, as well as being an instructor extraordinaire. And he's been commissioned to build a online training program for the Aerostar. And so far, what I've seen is absolutely fantastic. And it's going to continue going on for the next few weeks. And I'll talk more about that in a second. I met Mark a number of years ago when he came to me while he was managing and flying an Aerostar 700 corporately, looking for recurrent training. That's actually subject to one of the videos. I think it's how did we miss that NOTAM or something like that. And there's a couple of other ones that he's in as well. So if you can search those a little bit. And he gave me permission to publish this video. And this I thought was a great video talking about different scenarios, and one in specifically, which is an overspeed prop in flight and what to do and what's in the POH and what Larry, the subject of the video, actually did. Excellent watch, great quality on what you can expect in the future. Mark has also done a number of the videos for the program coming up, and I will continue to post those in a playlist so that when you watch them, they go out to his YouTube channel. Hope you guys will look at them as they get published and continue to support Mark's channel. I encourage all of you guys to watch the videos as they get posted on the playlist and continue to support this channel and of course Mark's. And this was one of the purposes of doing this, was to get him introduced and send some viewership his way, so you can see these excellent videos on Aerostar systems and components. So with that, here you go.
My guest today is Larry Baum. Larry, you wrote me and told me about an interesting experience you had in an Aerostar back in 2013, where you had a prop governor runaway situation at, I think you said you were flying at 19,000 feet. So be interested in hearing the details of how that unfolded and what you learned from that. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us how you got involved in flying, and in particular, how you got involved with the Aerostar community and flying the Aerostar that you're still flying today.
Hi. Well, Mark, thanks for having me. I started flying in 1974, about 3 or 4 months after I bought a third of a tri-pacer. In that, few friends were getting together and said, let's buy an airplane. I said, okay. So we bought a third of a tri-pacer. I'd been flying in small airplanes a little bit beforehand, and I thought, oh, this would be something interesting to do. So learned to fly in the tri-pacer. Ultimately bought out those two guys and owned the tri-pacer on our own.
And did you affectionately call it the flying milk stool?
Oh yes, absolutely. Fly. It was a yellow and white milk stool. And we flew it all over. We had it to the Bahamas. We had it down in Florida. It didn't really dawn on me that you could get places faster than like Florida in 13 hours from upstate New York, but you could do it. And I got my instrument rating in it. Had to take a check ride in a Cessna Skyhawk because the tri-pacer didn't have an ADF in it. So that's kind of how far back it goes.
Yeah.
And then not long after that, we bought a Piper Aero, and
Good solid airplane.
yes, flew that a lot. We had that out in California a couple times, and had that for over 10 years. And then we started getting interested in twins. And in 1985, I bought a Piper Seneca. My business partner was also a pilot and an A&P. We were a computer business, but he was also interested in interested in aviation. So we bought the Seneca together through our company, and we got that. And then I got a multi-rating. I kind of do things a little bit backwards.
A lot of us do.
And we owned that through around 1990. And then we actually sold it due to a business downturn in the early 90s. And after about 7 or 8 months, my wife said, "You've got to go out and buy an airplane. You're moping around too much." So,
oh, that's a great thing to hear from your wife.
It was wonderful to hear. So we bought a Navajo, which was an interesting plane to fly and own. I had flown a Navajo. I'd flown a Navajo back in the 70s, actually, right when I was learning to fly. The FBO had one, and back then, if you're flying parts or doing things like that, you got to spend time in the right seat, and which is really good training.
Nice introduction.
And then so I'd had actually a fair amount of unlogged multi-time by the time we bought the Seneca.
Was that a pressurized Navajo that you flew?
No, it was an unpressurized. It was a Chieftain.
Chieftain,
so
okay.
We had that for a little under a year, and I kind of gotten interested in pressurized airplanes. And only because we were flying back and forth to Florida a fair amount, and in the wintertime, our family was always getting sinus infections, oddly enough. So we started looking at pressurized airplanes and ended up buying a Cessna 340, which was a little bit like, not so much the Chieftain, but the original Navajo, which was kind of a 6-place, but it was pressurized.
Yeah.
And actually, my wife really liked that airplane.
Pretty roomy inside compared.
It was pretty roomy inside, but I'm going to be nice. It flies okay.
Yeah, I have about 40 hours in the Cessna 340. Okay. I get it.
Yeah, and yeah, the 340 was the kind of airplane that you didn't want to fly in any kind of turbulence if the yaw damper wasn't working, and when it was heavy, it was really interesting on 2 engines. And the only time I ever flew the thing on one was in a simulator. I never dared, but that's just the time.
Yeah.
And so we had that airplane for quite 2 years. And we were walking across the ramp in Florida. And my wife says, "What's that airplane sitting next to yours?" And I said, "Oh, that's an Aerostar." And she says, "Wow, that's a really nice looking airplane." Now, I had flown in an Aerostar maybe once or twice over the years.
As a passenger?
Well, yeah, passenger and in the right seat.
Yeah.
The FBO where I learned to fly had a contract with our Borg Warner plant. And when I started flying in 74, they were flying a Cessna 310, mostly running parts and people between Ithaca, and they had a plant in Dayton, I think, at the time. And that's what they were flying. It was piston stuff. And in 76 or 7, they got an Aerostar, 601P, short wing Aerostar.
Interesting.
Were very rare. There weren't that many of them built, and I think probably all of them had the wing extensions added to them. But that airplane was a real hot rod because it had the 290s, and it was turbo normalized, so they weren't boosted engines.
Right.
I flew in it a couple of times saying, "Hey, this is pretty neat." And I also said, and I think this was I still hadn't bought the Aero. I said, one day I'll be able to afford an Aerostar. That was my thought.
Yeah.
So roll around in 1996, and after the 340, we set out on a mission to find an Aerostar, and we did. And we bought 60 Lima Mike, which is an original 79601P.
That's the airplane you're still flying today, right?
Still, yep, 28 years later, which is really hard to believe.
Yeah.
And before we got it, the previous owner had done the upgrade to the Superstar. So with the 350, with the dual 350s, and we got it. We painted it. We put a new interior in it. Upgraded the avionics to I'll call it first or second generation GPS stuff, and most of that's still in there today. And 20 odd years later, it needs paint again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, you've had a long run with it, so it's not surprising that the paint's maybe ready to be refreshed a little bit.
and in the Northeast, you fly through rain and you fly through ice. So
yeah.
Yep.
So
The paint's due.
So by the time you had this incident, you've been flying that Aerostar for a while. You were pretty familiar with the plane.
Yeah, and yes, we were both familiar with the plane. And I'm not an instructor, but I know a lot of good ones. And I've always listened very carefully to how aircraft need to be flown in a single engine situation in a multi-engine aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And that, speed is everything. And if you're going to stay in control, speed is everything.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of incidents over the years, lost an engine going in. We were going into Fond du Lac for Oshkosh. Had an engine let go, and had to fly 50 miles with a single engine to get in, and that was relatively straightforward. We talked offline, I had an incident similar to yours. We ended up having to cage an engine due to what we found out later was a significant oil leak due to a damaged fitting. And got some pretty good training over the years. So when this incident occurred, I had a fair amount of time in the airplane, and a lot of the training that I had done were with instructors that were very comfortable. We didn't cage any engines, but we'd go to zero thrust and really see what the airplane would do.
Sure. So you're flying at 19,000 feet, and then what happened? Tell us how it unfolded.
So trip was, I was actually on my way to Maine, Brunswick, Maine, and airplane came out of annual, and it was fine. It was running really nice. So I was going to pick up some people selling another airplane in Brunswick, Maine. And they were selling a Bonanza, so we'd flown out. I had flown out by myself, going to pick up I think 3 or 4 people. 19,000 feet, and everything is fine. Airplane's doing great. I'm thinking how well the airplane's flying, and the left engine overspeeds. You just heard it. It just takes right off.
And was this the first flight out of annual, or is there a couple of flights?
No. I've been flying it out of annual. This is probably, several weeks after the airplane got out of annual. So we'd flown the airplane before, and it was nothing. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And the winds were favorable at 19 that day. That's why I wasn't at 25. And it was 2 hours and change to Brunswick, Maine. And I go, okay, this will be a fun flight. And I'm all by myself. So I'm 600-700 pounds under gross, and the airplane's flying really nice.
How much overspeed did you get?
So officially, it went over for less than 10 seconds. Yeah. That's what we wrote down. That way, the required teardown wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
That's about how much it was. And it was loud, it was fast. The airplane yawed because the left prop goes flat,
Yeah.
basically. So it's going even at high power. So
Yeah.
because the governor failed, so it's not going to govern at all.
Yeah.
And I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but I knew the engine was turning fast. I glanced at the I glanced at the tachometer, and one of them is way over 2575.
Wow.
And, so it's the left one. I pull the left engine, pull the left engine idle, and jam on the right rudder, keep the airplane going straight,
Yeah.
and kick off the autopilot and push the nose down. Push the nose down and say, okay, what's going on here? And then I started just slowing down, saying, okay, how do I keep the airplane under control? And I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to drop the engine. I'm going to feather the engine, obviously. So prop's already back, mixture. I'm sorry, the throttle's already back, prop mixture. And I start a turn. Airplane actually started the turn first. Then I'm going to start making a left-hand turn into the dead engine. And my instant thought was, okay, I got to get this airplane back to Ithaca. I'm like 70 miles away.
Yeah.
At 19,000 feet, I'm going to feather the engine and then just head back. So I start rolling out, tell ATC I've got an engine that's inoperative, and I'm turning back to Ithaca, and I want a clearance to 16,000 feet, because that's the single engine service ceiling.
Right.
So I'm going, okay, I should have pressurization at that time. And all along I'm thinking I've got a feathered engine.
This is a 700, right? 601P. Yeah, 700. Yeah.
So power up. I powered up the right engine a little bit, but not a lot, because unlike being close to the ground, you've got time. And I wanted to see what else was going on. About halfway through the turn, I realized that prop's not feathered. It's just windmilling. And I'm still in the turn, and I'm in a descending turn towards 16,000 feet. And I run through the engine shutdown procedure on the left engine. And I'm thinking, okay, how do I get this plane to fly level? I know I'm in a descent. And if I've got a windmilling propeller and nothing I can do about it, what am I going to do? How am I going to keep this airplane flying? It was flying in a few 100 foot per minute descent. Okay. So I start slowing down. And in my head was, you're not going below blue line. That was what was in my head. So
you were flying the airplane. That's number one priority. You were flying the airplane.
Yeah. And I'm absolutely not going below blue line at all. So that's 117 knots. So at about 120 indicated, and I'm still descending, I start bringing the power back up to see if I could fly level. And
on the good engine.
On the good engine.
Yeah.
Save, and the airplane is doing okay, but it's not happy at all as I was bringing the power up and trying to level off. So I settled for I'm already descending. I settled for like a 300 foot per minute descent. Again, about 120 indicated, and running probably 70% power on the good engine.
Right.
So, and of course, the rudders to the floor. The rudders to the floor. There's a little bit of bank into the into the dead engine, and so the airplane's flying not level, but it's flying. And so I'm talking to ATC. I'm still on an IFR flight plan, and I said, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to stay at 14. And they said, okay, you're cleared down to 11. It's Boston Center. 11's most likely the bottom of their airspace.
Yeah.
And so I'm continuing down, and I'm thinking about this. I'm also saying, okay, where am I going to put this airplane? There were like 4 airports along the way. All were relatively short runways, 3,000 to 4,000 feet. No services. Again, I'm in my backyard. We know all these airports, so it's local flying in some ways. And I'm also thinking, as long as I can keep this airplane in the air, I can keep going. There's no reason to do anything in a hurry, even though I'm at a descent.
That's good.
And I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to bring the airplane back to Ithaca if I can. So I've got Ithaca punched back in, and this is a 530, 430, and we have vertical speed necessary on the 430. It's for descent. It's it's one of the boxes, because you have enough extra boxes, so you use one of those.
Basically a form of VNAV that gives you an advisory glide path or an advisory descent rate anyway.
Exactly. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking, okay, I'm coming down at 200 to 300 feet per minute. Can I actually make it to Ithaca if the airplane won't level off? So at this point, I'm somewhere between 13 and 14,000 feet, and I'm probably 50-ish miles from Ithaca. And so it's telling me I've got, I'll show up in Ithaca about 500 feet above pattern altitude. And I'm going, okay. And I'm also thinking, well, when I get down into thicker air, the airplane might fly level in this situation.
Yeah.
So I knew I knew I had more power available, but the power wasn't doing me any good, because anytime I got more power, the windmilling engine was just creating more drag.
Yeah.
And so this funny thing.
You're just dragging a flat plate through the air.
Exactly. I think in the article that I ended up writing was like, explaining this to non-pilots or non-multi-pilots. It's like having a piece of plywood.
Yeah, it's very much like that. Very much like that. Now, those alternate airports that you were talking about, those were between you and Ithaca, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Was there anything else besides the shortness of the runway that would have made that a little bit?
Nothing in particular. I also knew, all the airports. I knew our home airport the best. I knew the equipment. I knew the people. And I somehow thought, if I can get close, I can get it in here.
Didn't you tell me at one point that those other runways were pretty narrow too, which probably caused
they
you
were.
some concern.
They were probably 75, 50 to 75 feet wide.
Yeah.
And going, normally in an Aerostar, that's fine, but I had no idea how the airplane was going to act on the ground, near the ground, with a windmilling propeller. So I wanted something long. There was one other long runway airport kind of south of my course. Somehow, it was Binghamton, New York. Somehow I never thought about it. It's also 500 feet higher than Ithaca. Ithaca is 1,100 feet above sea level, and Binghamton 1,600 feet.
Yeah.
No, I wanted lower. I wanted more time.
Yeah.
Anything to keep the airplane flying.
Yeah. Well, there's something about going back to your home base if it's safe to do so, because you've got more options, maintenance-wise.
So I get down to 11,000 feet, and the airplane's still coming down. I'm explaining to the controller that's what's going on. And he said, maintain 11,000. That was his answer. And so my answer to that is 60 Lima Mike declaring an emergency. Here's the plan.
Yeah.
I basically told him the plan. And once I declared an emergency, absolutely no problems.
Yeah.
he even asked me when we switched to the next sector. He says, are you okay doing a frequency change? And I
Nice.
said, yes, fine. The airplane's flying. I've got the airplane flying relatively, it's descending, but I've got, rudder trim in. I've got as much as I could have in to reduce the control forces.
Yeah.
Still in the descent. So at that point, I'm flying the airplane okay, and didn't really think much about anything else. That I was thinking about, okay, I want to get on a long final to Ithaca.
Mhm.
And I was in a position where I wouldn't have to make any significant turns to do that. So I started maneuvering that way. And by the time I get down to like about 4,000, 4,500 feet, airplane will fly basically level at that point.
Yeah.
And same type of power situation where you've got 70-75% on the good engine and the left engine's still windmilling.
Yeah.
So and one of the best things you got going at that point, it's VFR day. So I've got the airport in sight.
That's huge. Yeah.
15, 18 miles out. Knew what I was doing, didn't have to worry too much about flying instruments. And so I get in with about probably 3/4 of a mile, put the gear down, no flaps, plan on no flap landing. It's a 7,000-foot runway in Ithaca. I bring the power back and basically use the right engine to control the altitude vertical.
Yeah.
Just brought the power back, got down to about I was about 110, 117, right at that range. And I get in close, I get down to about 105, touchdown at about 105. Pretty close to the end of the runway. Use the whole runway to get stopped.
Mhm.
Airplane laterally was okay. It was a little squirrely, but it wasn't bad. It's a 100-foot runway, 100-foot wide runway in Ithaca, so there's plenty of width. The trucks are behind me, and
Of course.
we taxi in and
Got a parade.
got a parade, shut down, and sat there for a couple minutes.
Little retrospect.
Saying, okay, I got it down, and I'm going, all right, what's next? So I, get out of the airplane, and happened to literally, I don't know if he had heard me declare an emergency. I think he might have. The chief of operations for the FBO comes out to the airplane, and he's got a lot of piston time. They mostly work on jets, but he's got a lot of piston time. And he said, okay. And he said, I explained what's going on. And he said, let's just swap the governors. It's easy to do on an Aerostar. And
that's an advantage of a twin. Swapping things out can help you isolate problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He says, let's confirm that nothing else. So we swapped it out, fired up the right engine. It wasn't governing. It was really easy to tell. On the ground, you would never take off if you had that failure on the ground.
So you isolated, by using that method, you isolated it to the governor.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in the process, he says, I'm going to order a new governor.
Yeah.
And I said, fine. We keep a spreadsheet on the airplane, basically showing the hours on things and so on. So I was able to grab my laptop and said, oh, the other one is about the same number of hours. Order 2. So the net was order 2. We drain the oil out of the left engine. We cut the take the oil filter off, cut it off, check the screens, all that stuff. No metal.
No metal. Yeah, and the governor has a screen too, an oil screen.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So something internal broke on the governor.
Yeah.
A bunch of it aside, we asked for a report on the dead governor.
Yeah.
We never heard anything.
Interesting.
I think
yeah, and to provide some context for those that are watching this, the way a governor works, governor is really just an oil pump. And inside the prop hub, you have some counterweights, a spring, and a nitrogen charge. And those three things are acting to try and feather the prop all the time. The oil pressure from the governor opposes that. So by balancing the incoming oil pressure from the governor with the spring, the counterweights, and the nitrogen charge, they're opposing each other. And then the governor will vary the oil pressure to get the right amount of pitch. So the failure mode of a governor, if it were to stop giving oil pressure to the hub, then the opposite of what you experienced would happen. It would go into it would go into feather. It would go into feather. So the failure mode of the governor in your situation was it was putting the maximum oil pressure to the hub that it could. It wasn't governing the oil. It wasn't regulating the oil pressure. It was just giving it all it could. So yeah, that's
the opposite. And of course, that's not supposed to happen.
Yeah, definitely not supposed to happen.
Not supposed to happen.
Yeah, and you had a friend of yours that asked you a question after the fact that
so here's the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So we get down. I'm okay. I'm fine. I call our friends in Maine who I was supposed to pick up, telling them I'm not going to pick them up, and they sorted that out. And a good friend of mine who happens to be the owner of the FBO, we actually started flying about the same time in the 70s. We actually met in middle school, and I'd known Roger for essentially most of my life.
Cool.
He comes over and he looks at me and he explains what's going on, and I explained what's going on, and he said, "Did you ever think of restarting the engine?" And I look at him, and I remember he said to me later, he says, "You got this real blank look on your face."
I've been guilty.
I go, "No." And I thought for a moment, and I go, "Did I do this right? Got it down, but did I do it right?" So that's when I started doing some homework. And I went home and didn't tell my wife what happened. Just said that the trip didn't happen. And I went to the internet. I started looking around. I put something out on the Aerostar forum. And looking on the internet was, at that time, was not a very good, it wasn't very encouraging. The only thing I found was several NTSB reports where somebody in a Navajo, I think there was somebody in an Aztec, same thing had happened. They'd gotten too slow, rolled the airplane over, and essentially split us into the ground.
Yeah.
Now, I was fortunate for a lot of reasons. Probably the most was that I was high. Yeah. I was high, and I knew getting slow was not. Anything, regardless of what happened, you can't get slow.
Yeah.
And continue flying the airplane. So I got a couple answers back. At the time, Simcom was doing Aerostar training. This was in 2013. Still doing Aerostar training. And in one of their checklists was basically the statement, if you had a prop runaway, don't shut the engine off. Just bring it back to idle. And the earliest version of the Aerostar flight training manual was being created. And I had a copy of it, and I had glanced at it. I hadn't read it very carefully. And
from the Aerostar Owners Association.
Yes.
Yeah.
And buried in it was, in that same scenario, don't shut down the engine. So I'm going, all right, I read my POH pretty carefully, and I've been through a bunch of training stuff and all that. This had never come up. In the 601P, POH, that didn't exist in
Right.
2013. Probably doesn't exist today, doesn't ours. But I realized that I hadn't done it right. I pulled it off anyway, but the correct thing to do would have been everything I started with was absolutely correct. Pull the power back and all of that, and keep the airplane flying or high enough.
Right.
So
Yeah. And you had a very good decision-making process going there as well, evaluating your options.
Instead of shutting the engine down, you keep the engine running, and you essentially find zero thrust.
Yeah.
You do so at an airspeed where you're not overspeeding the engine.
Yeah.
So I will tell you that after this was all over, we got the airplane fixed and all that stuff. My then partner in the Aerostar and I went out and we simulated this. Now, obviously, the engine wasn't overspeed.
Right.
Okay, because the governor stops at 2575. So we knew we were going above that. But what kind of speed would it take? What kind of airspeed would it take to have zero thrust on the inoperative engine and actually have it come off the governor? So it's actually got to be, because your governor can't be in play. If your governor's in play, you're cheating.
Yeah, exactly.
No longer working. And it turns out it's right around 120 knots. It was like 120, between 120, 125 knots. We were doing it like, 8,000, 9,000 feet.
So explain how you determine when the governor started to, what airspeed made the governor on the windmilling engine begin to
when you land an Aerostar and you actually pull the power back and you watch the tacks, as you slow down, the airplane will actually, the governors will no longer govern, and the propeller speed will actually drop below whatever the setting is. And if you set it high, which we were doing in this experiment, I think we had them set like 2,500 or something like that.
Yeah.
It'll come off by itself. And because it can no longer govern between the oil pressure and the pressure on the propellers, it'll no longer govern. So we figured that out and saying, okay, right around 120, 125 knots in a zero thrust, you could create a zero thrust situation. All you wanted to do at the time is not have it go above 2575.
Yeah.
You could spin it, at red line all day long. The engine's built.
Yeah.
So to do that, and you would bring up enough power on the operating engine, which, if I remember right, I think when we tinkered with it, was like right around 70% power.
Yeah.
In that circumstance. It would operate and the plane would fly level.
Yeah. That's a great exercise.
Yeah.
Just being able to figure out how to get that zero thrust situation without overspeeding the windmilling engine. That's that basically puts you into the same scenarios if the engine were feathered, right? So that you got the same performance available. So you don't have this big speed break out there that's robbing.
So when we all train in Aerostars, or actually any twin, what's zero thrust? You're basically you're basically creating a scenario where there's enough thrust out of the inoperative engine, so it's like it's feathered.
Yeah.
Not producing drag, and it's not producing forward thrust.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's neutral, and of course, all our training, it's very rare that you actually feather an engine. It's part of it's part of the ACS for getting your rating. But afterwards, you don't do that very often. And depends on your instructors, or the instructors I fly with. Rarely.
I usually do it once. I don't do it repeatedly because it's hard on it, but
it's hard on it.
In training, we'll do an actual feather and restart once, but we don't do it multiple times.
Right. And you do it once on, you do it once on your, on your check ride.
Yeah.
Uh, so, we went through that exercise. And then, one of the things that I think I went back to, I can't remember who was working on the training manual at the time. I basically said, what's buried in there needs to be highlighted, and here's why. And
Yeah.
it's now a separate page
Yeah.
in the Aerostar training manuals, which is that's really a good thing. I have
It
not
is.
heard
Yeah.
of anybody else having this problem. It would have been an incident. It still was an incident, thankfully, but it would have been a much more manageable scenario. And I, over the last 11 years, I've thought about it a lot.
Yeah. Now, just kind of extending that one step further, what about if that incident had happened to you at 500 feet on climb out? So what do you, in retrospect, what do you think would have made sense to do in that scenario?
It's a good question. In some ways more challenging.
Yeah.
You've got to get, you're probably above the right speed. It depends on climb out. Climb out, you're going to do between 140 and 150 knots.
Yeah.
You're going to want to get down to 120, get the airplane slowed down to reduce the drag on the dead engine.
Hopefully you're already there if you're only 500 feet on climb out.
Yeah, if you're 500 feet, you're only at 120, 130, depending on how much you let it accelerate.
Yeah.
It depends which school you're from. Do you go for speed or do you go for climb early? I'm sort of in the first group. I like to let the airplane accelerate.
Yeah.
Personally, if it accelerates and something goes south, your initial reactions to pull, no matter how much training you've had. Well, pulling at 140 is a whole lot better than pulling at 120.
Yeah.
You've got at least something to work with.
And I think what's important for people to realize that are watching this is that in that scenario where you have an overspeed, you are very likely, I should say, it's very unlikely you will be able to feather because of the failure mode of the governor. So if you'd pulled the mixture and tried to feather at that point at 500 feet, you'd be kind of boxing yourself into a corner because now you've got a windmilling prop that you can't get feathered and it's also not running. So when you're low to the ground, maybe pull the throttle back a little bit so it doesn't overspeed quite as bad, but make use of whatever thrust it's giving you to get yourself to pattern altitude so you can come back around.
The other question is, do you say the hell with the engine?
Exactly. Skin
and go,
over tin,
okay,
right?
let it's overspeeding. All right.
Yeah.
It's overspeeding. Don't shut it down.
Yeah. Who cares if
it bring it down to you got to get slowed down to land anyway.
Yeah.
So, get the airplane, first fly the airplane.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you're just at 500 feet, you're gonna, at least I would, I'd want to level the airplane off. You're already at high power on both engines. You've got one that's overspeeding. It's keeping the airplane under control, getting it level.
Absolutely.
And then in an overspeed circumstance, bring the power way back, but shoot for zero thrust. At zero thrust, all our training has been, you ought to be able to fly the airplane level flight with a zero thrust engine and power on the other one.
Yeah.
This is somewhat of a difference between the superstars and the 601Ps, the 290s versus the 350.
Yeah.
I've talked with a couple of instructors who've done a lot of time in both. The 350s have, even on one engine, you've got 60 horsepower of excess thrust. That's not
Makes a big difference.
It makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And if the airplane's harder to control and you're staying level, I wouldn't be scared of pulling the power back on the good engine a little bit, just to help keep the airplane under control.
Yeah, control is key, and performance is right behind that. But if you lose control, then yeah, that's usually a bad outcome.
It is a bad outcome.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've been doing, our flying club has been training in a Seneca 3, and one of the things that we've been doing, and I've been helping with rewriting their manuals about, keeping the airplane under control is everything. And the POHs don't really tell you that. They're giving you speeds that say, speeds and power that say, they say this is what you're supposed to fly at. But if you're slow, having full power on an engine is not a good thing.
Yeah, especially in a twin.
Especially in a twin.
Yeah.
And your only choice to keep the airplane under control is pull power on the good engine.
Yeah, if you're losing control, that is the only option. Yep, just accept what you got straight ahead. Well, great story, Larry. Just in closing, is there anything that you would like to share with your fellow Aerostar pilots, or what they could take away outside of what you've already mentioned?
It's, as we all know, and I've had this one for 28 years. It's a fabulous airplane. We need to take care of them. They take a lot of maintenance. We all know that. But compared to all the other twins that I've owned, this one will get you there, and it'll get you there when things aren't going well, if you stay control and keep the airplane flying.
Well, great lessons. Appreciate you being on the on the interview with me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.